What up, people? Welcome to another episode of the MySpace Effect, Building Influence and Impact. I'm your host, Herschel Peters. Thank you for taking time to join me again tonight, this Tuesday night. I'm really excited about this particular episode because we're going to be moving from the end of a relationship regarding divorce, broken covenant, brokenness, backlash, breakthrough, and now building again. This will have somewhat of a redemptive arc from all the deconstruction and, for some say, destruction. And I just really want to zoom out from not just those surviving the end of a thing. I want to really focus in on rebuilding your life, your identity, and relationships in a healthier, more intentional way. And that's why I really coined this as a redemptive arc, because that's really what we're going to be moving into. The transition from the end of a thing to the new beginning. It's going to be a good episode. You already know what it is. Let's get to it.
And welcome to my space.
Welcome to my space. You did.
I said last week, you don't rebuild by proving your past wrong. You rebuild by living your future right. And so I want to kind of give an idea of what that looks like, because at some point, the storm ends. The noise quiets down and the backlash, it slows. Sooner or later, it slows, depending on who and what you got going on, what you're dealing with. But then you're left to what now? I dealt with that recently at a particular place I was helping, doing some business and ministry things that I had to ask myself, what do I do now after this fallout? After this broken covenant and much more, how do I move forward from the ruins and the deconstruction to restoration? And so, like I said, we started at the end, we dealt with broken covenant, then we moved into the backlash of things. You have a lot of people out there that talks about what they've survived, but like I mentioned a few episodes ago, resilience is just not enough. Resilience, what are you becoming? What is all this turning you into? And that's really what needs to be talked about, because we got to go beyond. We just don't want to sit in pain and wall up in emotions and stuff. Talk about it. It needs to be talked about. That's not even being disregarded. I'm talking about the big picture. Where is this taking us along the way, ultimately? And when you look at the perspective of, when the dust settles, that is the strange silence in the midst of chaos. It can feel empty, but to be honest with you, it's really clarity. Some could look at it as an emotional detox where grief and anger and confusion begins to settle. So even from a leadership perspective, because that's really what I'm honing in on, wise builders don't rush to rebuild in the smoke of battle. They wait for the dust to clear so they can see what needs to be restored. Number one, that's why I talked about the end of a thing is better than the beginning. Patience is better than pride. That's why it takes patience to let stuff settle. But also, if you look in Ecclesiastes 3:3, it says there's a time to break down and a time to build up. So you want to rebuild the right way versus the wrong way. So how does that look? Well, one way is that you are quick to jump into a new relationship. Yeah. Jumping too quickly into a new relationship is a sign of you're rebuilding the wrong way. Because anytime you try to rebuild to prove a point or get revenge, ultimately what you're doing is you're using old blueprints that failed. They've already failed. That is rampant in our society nowadays. And you'll see that greatly amongst people who don't know who they are. Their identity is jacked and warped. And then and typically, ultimately, you'll see a lot of that in people that have a survivor's mentality. They really don't take much time to become. I always got to prove I can survive it. I can get on top of this. And typically you get in a lot of trouble with that. But see, this is the right way. The right way looks like when you rebuild is you ground your new foundation in healing, not hurt. You have to ground it in healing, not hurt. but it takes slowing down to reestablish identity and boundaries. That's what it takes. Seeking wisdom and accountability. Now, another Bible verse that comes to mind is Matthew 7, verses 24 and 25, where it talks about a wise man build his house on the rock. You have to build it on something solid. You go out there and try to build a house now on some mud, you see how far you can get. You ain't going nowhere. You need some healing, some wholeness. And see, as you begin to move into that, you'll begin to see what healthy looks like in a new beginning. You won't need someone to complete you because you're already whole. And your identity is no longer tied to the past pain. Another sign of readiness in a relationship is that you can love without fear, bitterness, or comparison. You begin to date with intentionality. You'll be able to have some conversation that's rooted in honesty and not defensiveness. And then ultimately, you can start building together in shared vision and values. That's what that looks like from a practical standpoint. Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 17, 18 says, let us rise up and build. Get up and build. Get up and build. Some of the leadership lessons you'll learn out of going through things like this as you move into the new and new beginnings is that in order to have a new beginning, you need a new blueprint. You need a new blueprint because you cannot build the future on yesterday's plans. God just doesn't restore. He gives a new vision. He gives a new vision. And so when it comes to leadership, leaders, it's just not about surviving. It's not about surviving in general. It's not even about surviving betrayal. It's about modeling how to rebuild stronger. You see, that's what really pushes us into this redemptive arc. Ultimately, what restoration can look like from a practical standpoint as you get new beginnings coupled with new blueprints, you'll see yourself valuing peace over performance, consistency over chaos, purpose over proving points. That's important because God specializes in redeeming stories. That's why the end of a relationship is not the end of you. It's just the beginning of a better foundation. In Isaiah 61:3, it said, beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, and praise for despair. Though I'm young, I've been doing leading, having to lead myself and lead others for a long time. I've been doing it for a long time. And I've discovered that, as many things I've been through, that hasn't always been the end of my story, even though it has felt like it. I want to encourage you that your story don't end in the ruins. It doesn't. The ruins are just the evidence it didn't last, but they're also the foundation God will use to build what will last. I want you to reflect on the area in life where, whether it's relationship, purpose, even your calling, where you need to rebuild with new blueprints. Because like I said, it's a trend now to where people rebuild on yesterday things. You get in this vicious cycle, you get entrapped. All of this serves as a purpose. All of this serves as a purpose to push us to be better, to build on firmer foundations, to rebuild with new blueprints. So yeah, it comes to a point in time where you stop asking why it happened and start asking, what is it that it taught me? And I know for me personally, I realize sometimes love fails so that you don't. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes God will let certain things fall apart, not to punish us, but to protect what he's still building inside of us. And so I know for me, the goal was never just to survive heartbreak. It was to rebuild right. Literally. It was to become healthy enough to potentially love again without fear, without control, and without needing validation. And those things are important in life. Some of us underestimate it, but those things are important to be able to do things without fear, without worrying about being controlled. And you don't need to be people pleased, validated, and all the other stuff. No. Everything we go through in life ultimately is for purposes of identity. It's always about identity, who we ultimately choose to become, even after the dust settles. That's the whole purpose of this episode, to really help us gain that perspective, to give us hope, to move forward and know that the future is bright, regardless of the circumstances. I tell people often, it's not circumstances that merely define you, it's what you do with them that ultimately defines you. So if you're listening right now and you've walked through betrayal, divorce, disappointment, or the fallout of something that broke you, I want to encourage you. You can build again. You can love again. You can trust again. But this time, you'll do it from a healed place and not a haunted one. Because at the end of the day, failure isn't final. Not when faith is still present. And the ruins aren't the end of your story. They're the ground where restoration begins. Yeah. And so this has been when love fails with yours truly, Herschel M. reminding you, don't rush to rebuild, but rebuild right. Y'all take it easy.